Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. After the brutal terrorist attack on tourists in Pahalgam in Kashmir, which killed 26 people, Kashmiris came out to protest against the killings. There was a groundswell of support among Kashmiris who helped the tourists in different ways. The tourists who made it back home too had nothing but praise for the support they received. Since then, the Indian government, instead of capitalizing on this goodwill, has demolished the homes of many Kashmiris suspected of being terrorists or being linked with them. Kashmiri students have been humiliated in different states and sent back, and the media has raised the stakes by their blatantly communal reportage. Left to the channels, India would have gone to war by now. What impact has this had in Kashmir, where the tourism industry has already been hit badly? What impact has this had in Kashmir, where the tourism industry has already been hit badly? Is this a lost opportunity to build bridges? My guest today, Anuradha Bhasin, is a long-time astute observer of the Kashmiri scene. She is managing editor of the Kashmir Times and has also written a very well received book, A Dismantled State: The Untold Story of Kashmir After Article 370. Anuradha Bhasin, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
When you first heard of the attack on tourists, what was your first thought?
The first thought, the initial reports that came out were one tourist killed, and, so I thought it was the usual stuff. I mean, not normally that tourists have been attacked, and I didn't think that this was a targeted attack at that point. But as moments after that, as news started pouring in within an hour or so, the picture looked much more ghastly. And so it was one of shock. It was one of shock because tourists have not been attacked earlier, even though, terrorism had not ended, as opposed to the government's claims that it is completely decimated. It has been going on. Last year there was an uptick in the violence in different militancy related incidents. So while any kind of an attack was not unexpected, an attack on tourists was um, a little shocking. And as details started coming in of how they had been targeted, I think it was also of a lot of pain. Um, yeah, these were the initial thoughts.
So, does this represent a completely different way of terrorists going about killing people? I mean, picking on tourists who are, innocent visitors from somewhere. Does this represent a major change, a major shift, you would say?
Yeah, it is a major, I won't say it's a major shift. Terrorism is it's a theater that has been going on. Militancy has been going on for a long, long time, for about more than 35 years now. But, it has seen several different phases. Of course, in the 90s, it was at its peak. And ever since it started declining, then there have been ups and downs. There have been different phases. There was a phase post 2010 when militants were homegrown and they were targeting people, targeting mostly the security forces and not civilians. Before that, we've had a few civilian massacres in 2036 in Chatti Singhpura, where Sikhs were singled out and killed. There were Kashmiri Pandits who were singled out in Nadi Marg in 2003, earlier in Mandhama and Sangrama. But, tourists was something new. And early, so I won't call it a shift, but yes, it is unprecedented.
Now, the Delhi government has proclaimed that terrorism was over after Article 370 had been withdrawn. Mr. Amit Shah, Home Minister, said now that Mr. Modi is the Prime Minister, terrorists will not come in. Kashmir is safe. In fact, they were kind of promoting the idea of tourism, and no matter what now anyone says. So that was completely, you think, I mean, nobody in Kashmir must have believed it because terrorism, as you said, small incidents were happening here and there, and now there's big one.
Yes, it is big one. But even though as there is shock, there is grief, um, because this hasn't happened before. But I won't say that this was unexpected, um, because the government has been, on the one hand, while they have been pushing, you know, the tourism narrative, and the tourist narrative is like the showpiece of the narrative of normalcy, the overall normalcy that this government tries to project. And of course it also includes inflated figures, and tries to show that, Indians can now come here, and earlier they couldn't, which is not true, because tourism was always there. It had its ups and downs, but we've had good tourism a decade ago. And the narrative, I think, was extremely problematic, because there was an aggression in that narrative, as if Kashmir has been conquered, and the presence of tourists was kind of bandied about like a trophy. And this was creating some kind of a resentment at the ground level. Now we can't say whether who the perpetrators are. We still don't know at the moment, but I'm presuming whoever it was, at some level there may have been some local support, and that cannot exist if there is no alienation at the ground level. And
So you,
that alienation was created by, this whole obsession with tourism. Even though Kashmiris are not against tourists. In fact, there is about a 15 to 20% population that is reliant on tourism for livelihood, and they're not opposed to it, but it's the narrative, the way it was being projected. Tourism has taken over, has replaced terrorism.
and how did you sense this? How was this?
I mean, for
Uh,
somebody who's been following Kashmir for many, many years, would have been worried. Whatever happened in the last 5 years. Um, it's not just the tourism narrative. It is not just the narrative of normalcy. Beneath that narrative, there was a reality which was not being shown. And that reality was extremely ugly. It was about disempowering people in various ways, disempowering them politically, disempowering them economically, and further suppressing them. The erstwhile state has been broken into two. It has been reduced to union territories. Elections have now recently taken place, but the government doesn't have any power. So, where do people go with their problems? So the political powers don't exist. Economically, people are impacted because they now need to compete for in government jobs. They need to compete with people from outside. With the constitutional protections gone, people from outside can come and purchase land. So and the old structure of land laws has been so brutally changed that people who were rightful owners or possessors of land, uh, as per the previous laws, can now that can be now challenged. They can be evicted from those. So there is a massive sense of disempowerment, and apart from that there is massive suppression. Daily detentions, raids, interrogations. Civil society has been completely decimated. uh, Journalism has been completely pushed out. It doesn't, no reportage comes from there. There has been a complete erasure of what is actually happening in Kashmir. And why that worried me, because even as a journalist I felt that my own networks were breaking, because people are scared to talk, so you don't know enough. And because there has been extreme suppression, and you followed Kashmir and you know Kashmiri sentiment, I I was worried that this will take a dangerous turn, and I have been talking about it earlier.
So, actually, you made a lot of points. I'll come to the land part a bit later. But just to uh, s- tell you how the gap between reality and perception, because I saw an interview with one of the tourist survivors who returned to her home state, was being interviewed by somebody or the other, and these things are only being shown on social media, mind you.
Hmm.
Mainstream television is not showing. She said all the media I had read and watched over the last few years, I felt so safe and secure because the government kept on assuring me that things are very nice and you should go there. And I felt that this may be the time to visit. Now, the thing is, the points I'm making are media was blasting that narrative,
Hmm.
and to an ordinary person sitting somewhere who's planning their annual holiday, this was the perfect place to go to because everything is fine, everything is hunky dory. It's like the good old days, and nothing of the alternate view was coming through. So you see, even to now, as an observer of what is going on and reading, one sees that the media has really played a role in this. So, were
Yes.
the Kashmiris, no, my question to you specifically is, were the Kashmiris getting a sense that their voice was not being heard?
Yeah, absolutely. Kashmiris were getting a sense that their voice was not being heard. They were not, uh, you know, the exact picture on the ground was not being shown. And I think now that you mentioned the interviews of the tourists, the government has not only done harm to Kashmiris by completely, blocking their voices, by completely stonewalling their voices, but it has also misled the nation. It has misled innocent, gullible Indians into believing that Kashmir is a safe place. You should go there for tourism, and risk their lives, put their lives on the line.
Now, coming to the local government, you mentioned that the local government has no power. These were supposed to be successful elections. There was a good turnout. Where do you think things have gone wrong on that front?
It is the structure that is problematic. The relations between New Delhi and Jammu and Kashmir have changed. Jammu and Kashmir is no longer a state, so it does not, any government that takes over the reins of power is not going to have those powers. It's just a puppet, virtual puppet regime. Other than that, they just before the elections they had these executive orders where by the lieutenant governor was given more powers, sweeping broad powers for decision making on even things like, tra- basic transfers. So, further limiting the powers of a union territory government. Now, as a union territory government, the powers have not even been clearly defined. Who's in charge of what? So, I think it's problematic.
But did if these rules were put in place before the elections, how come? How do you explain the massive turnouts? Was there a hope that they would have their government of their choosing with powers?
It's very, it's complicated, but in some ways, it was mixed. There was hope, um, that the government would, I'm sure, even though the promises were made that 370 would, we talk about 370, we'll talk about statehood, and we'll talk about this and that, but at least people had hope that their day-to-day issues would be resolved by a government, local government. And maybe they'll talk about statehood, maybe they'll talk about some concessions, and they'll have some power. And that is why there was this massive voting. There was also massive voting because people had no hope, but they wanted to give a message. These are people who have been silenced for 5 years, who have had no platforms to speak on, whose voices have been suppressed and crushed. And they felt okay, they have the freedom to go out and vote. And for them, I think voting was just expressing or articulating what they felt. And what they felt was, okay, we choose somebody our own, and not BJP's proxies.
Hmm. Tell me about land. What we all knew so far pre 370 that as somebody from outside the state, I couldn't buy land.
Hmm.
We all knew that. There are two or three other states, by the way, in the country where you can't buy land. I can't buy land in Himachal Pradesh, for example, and somewhere in the northeast.
Hmm.
But never mind that. I knew that. What exactly are the changes that have been brought uh, about, which have, and how has it actually affected the people of Kashmir?
I mean, that has been the major change. Um, the law, the constitutional protections that have gone after 370, um, which means that, earlier we had permanent resident certificates. Now these have been replaced by domicile certificates. So domicile, anybody who has stayed in, there are two three different categories, but anybody who's kind of stayed in Jammu and Kashmir between for about 5 to 10 years, has worked there, has studied there, they can apply for these domicile certificates. And you know their status is as equal as the former permanent residents of the state. So these are the people, they can apply for and compete with the original residents of Jammu and Kashmir for government jobs, for seats in higher institutions of education. So that it does create some kind of anxieties in the minds of people here. Other than that, more importantly, previously business contracts, mining contracts, these were given to locals. And though there were ways in which business companies from outside have earlier invested in Jammu and Kashmir, there were very limited options because there were laws which allowed the government to give lands on lease on certain cases. But there were several checks and balances. So these were not so random, so uh, on a, not on a large scale. But now this is being done on a large scale. So business, a lot of business investments by in industries, in real estate, in mining. Most of the contracts have gone to outsiders. So local business people and firms feel completely marginalized because they don't have such deep pockets as people coming from Punjab or Bombay or anywhere else. And a major change is the land. And land has been at the back of the minds of Kashmiris for a long time, because even for years we've heard of the anxieties over a demographic change. And these anxieties were not totally misplaced, but it seemed a little these weren't misplaced because the RSS for the last 7 decades has been talking about changing the demography of Kashmir as a resolution to the Kashmir issue. And so the anxieties existed, but it seemed preposterous because the constitutional guarantees existed. Um, Yet the anxieties were not misplaced because autonomy in the past had been eroded. So there were fears, that this 370, what if it could go in one stroke? And the only thing left, I mean, everybody says that it was only symbolic. Whatever was left before 2019, I don't think it was that symbolic, but because what it protected were the land rights of the people. And with that gone, with people from outside, anybody, and not just domicile, any Indian citizen can buy land in
No, but
Kashmir.
but let me just stop you there. How many have actually done that?
Um, we still don't have numbers. I don't think much, but the fear is there.
No, but I'm saying that, let's
Hmm.
say that some major real estate company has come there and invested and bought acres and hundreds of acres, because even the investor looking at this map of this entire country would go to places where there is minimum risk.
Hmm.
So they have not rushed to Kashmir. It's not happened yet, or has it?
I think it's more anecdotal. There's no data. The only data we recently had was about 85,000 domiciles, certificates being made. It's anecdotal, but a few cases have come up where industries have been set up, and it's mostly in Jammu region, because Jammu is probably a more favorable place for any Indian. It's geographically, culturally more contiguous to, interlinked with mainland India than Kashmir is. It is safer, it's more peaceful. So there are investments there. But there are, I think, investments also being made in the mining industry, where it's sand mining, there are other minerals mining. And these are spread across the state, the erstwhile state. So those investors are still coming in.
So, all in all, what you're saying is the sense of alienation has grown.
Hmm.
Uh, all in all, whether
Yes.
you take these factors or the ones that you mentioned, which were simmering underneath the so called peaceful narrative of everything back to normal. Tell me, even so, when this happened, the Kashmiris came out firstly in protest. They also helped tourists. Every tourist interviewed after their return to their homes said we were helped by somebody or the other. Many people said we will continue staying there. So there was goodwill on both sides. as it were. If you count it as both sides, Kashmiris were also feeling it, that this shouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
We read that that mood has dissipated briskly after the demolitions, after the other things that have gone on, and after the build-up of anti, I won't say anti-Kashmiri here, but generally anti-Muslim sentiment that has been going on. The media is playing it up, and the Indian government, Modi government, did not take that one extra step to create a sense of bhaichara, as to
Mm-hmm.
say this goodwill is there. Is that a correct assessment? Because that is the assessment that seems to be written about.
No, the goodwill among Kashmiris has always been there. Even through the militancy years. I remember, at least I can recount a few incidents in the past 20 years, when there have been disturbances, sudden disturbances in Kashmir. When there were these street protests in 2010, in 2008, when the land row happened, in 2014 floods, when people were, their own lives were risked, but they were helping others. They were helping, even, especially tourists. In the Pahalgam pilgrims, I think even they were fed and looked after. um, so that uh, feeling of, uh, the hospitality and is very central to Kashmiri ethos, that has always existed. So people came out, a, because of that. I'm talking about Kashmiris. B, they also understand that at the back of their minds, it wasn't just Bonhami. It At the back of their minds, it was also that they realize that they are the worst victims of terrorism, and they have to bear the brunt of counterinsurgency as well. And they need to, caught between these two extremes, they need to constantly prove their innocence. They're smart people, and though the initial, all the protests and the solidarity messages, there was both a sense of urgency in that, and both a sense of spontaneity in that.
But this subsequent demolitions and the students being sent back,
Absolutely, yeah.
that must have created real resentment, wouldn't you say?
Of course, and that is probably one of the reasons I said, one of the probable reasons that they came out in big numbers was also this fear that they would have to prove their innocence, and or that they would be targeted in various ways. And that happened just so fast. Everything changed, within 2 days there was massive crackdown within the valley, in across India, where there is, this hyper nationalism is on steroids, both in the digital space and the physical space. And the government is doing nothing about it. So that there have been cases every day. You hear of, reported and unreported cases. So grief turned into fear, into anxiety, into and it doesn't take much time to turn it into alienation, even hatred, if I may say.
What could or should have the government have done in an ideal situation?
Well, in an ideal situation, any mature government would first take into account that this is a failure. This is a political and a security failure. And so, instead of trying to pass the buck by naming perpetrators without evidence. I think it should have been a more matured and a seasoned response based on investigation, based on ownership and responsibility of the failures, and given assurance to the nation that we are together in this. We are united. There were messages, I mean, of unity, messages of unity from Kashmir, they were coming. Even within India, I think in that whole din of hyper nationalism, which gets so amplified by the ugly Godi media, which gets amplified by in social media, because there are even the BJP IT industry is pretty strong, and they are quite helpful in further amplifying it. So instead, apart from these kind of voices, there were also voices of peace and unity and calm, and those are the voices that should have been highlighted by the government to build bridges, to be united in times like this.
Don't you think that's asking for too much from this government?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, their politics thrives on this, and so why would they do it?
Uh, Within Kashmir, is there a sense that there's going to be some kind of cross-border military action, or do
There
you
are
think?
fears. There's a lot of panic because people are like stocking up, and Kashmiris even normally do because uh, even if when situations are kind of normal, that's a way of living because it's in winters, sometimes you're cut off. So they've started stocking up supplies and essentials, and there is more panic in the border areas, because they are the ones who bear the brunt of any hostility, even if there is no full-fledged war. Any low in what seems like low intensity wars sitting in Delhi, or in those panel discussions, they are played on the bodies of people, on their homes, their daily psychological and physical uprootment from these areas. And sometimes if they are prolonged, um, they completely devastate families, villages.
What do you think will happen?
It's difficult to predict what this government can do and is capable of doing. But and at the same time, we now just don't have one side, we also have the other side. So both in India and Pakistan, I don't think we have the best of governments and statesmanship like leadership on either side, which is missing. I'm Though everybody says that things are not going to worsen, any kind of misadventure from either side could be extremely costly in a world that is completely reshaping, where geopolitical, uh, we don't have a kind of stabilizing factor from anywhere. Anybody who can exercise influence, any international powers today who can exercise influence and get India and Pakistan to shift from war mode to peace mode to talking mode.
So anything could go happen, anything could go wrong,
I hope not.
and if it does, a lot of innocent people pay for their lives. I mean, as far as I mentioned in my introduction, as far as the TV channels are concerned, we are imminent about to go into a state of war, because they have their fun and their TRPs and their chance to show their ultra patriotism by this way. But TRPs being the most important thing here. But I think one senses sober voices also. So perhaps that might this that might help in the end. But you, sticking to Kashmir, do you think there is, for whatever it's worth, is the tourism industry dead for the time being, or are people still going there? From what are you
No,
hearing?
some tourists have started coming back, but they have shut down. I haven't followed exactly which places they've shut down, because
40,
several new
48.
areas of, in the recent years, several new areas of uh, several new tourist spots had been opened for tourists.
Yeah,
So they've shut them down. Uh,
48 of them.
yeah. So, but tourists have started returning. Um, it's still low key, and if all goes well at the borders, and things can be sorted out between India and Pakistan, I think tourism won't be hit that much. People will come.
And that is one factor that ultimately does help in the bigger picture, with the money being pumped into the economy and a
Yeah,
sort
to
of.
some extent, yes. But at the same time, if you have actions on the ground which continue to suppress people, and there's collective punishment in the way that the houses have been demolished, in the size of the people who have been detained, and this is extremely disproportionate. There were about 5, 6, 7, maybe 12 people who were there. We don't even know the full numbers, part of, who were the perpetrators. There may have been few others who were part of the conspiracy. Now, if you're presuming that most of them were Pakistanis, then the local support was very less. So you see the disproportionate number of people being impacted by this kind of a suppression. Everybody being looked at with suspicion. And yeah, so that's, I don't know if tourism can balance out that sense of alienation that comes from such actions.
So, Anuradha, I'm afraid I've sensed that you are a bit pessimistic on the whole, that things, but in a sense, from what you've been telling me and from what one has known, it's business as usual as far as uh, the fate of the ordinary Kashmiri is concerned.
Hmm.
Though I think if this results in some kind of bridges being built, after all, you have a government in Kashmir which can and is trying to do something and saying some things. Mr. Omar Abdullah's speech, for example. So you are on the whole, may I say that you are on the whole a little pessimistic, unless the government of India takes mature steps forward.
Um,
To round it up.
I wouldn't like to use the word pessimistic, but yes, at the moment, yes, the near future, I don't see much hope, but still, a lot depends on how things will pan out, how different, individuals play their role. And I think the JNK government has played a good role, even reached out to different states, at least talking about, why Kashmiris are being harassed. They need to take it up further. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. So a lot depends there. But I think in the long term, I'm not a pessimist. Right now, I may sound like one. In the long term, I'm not, because things change. Nothing stays forever.
Okay, well, that Anuradha Bhasin, probably one of the most astute observers of the Kashmir scene, and who is, of course, a journalist and writes a lot for Kashmiri and other media, but also has written an excellent book. Anuradha, I read your book, it's excellent.
Thank you
Uh,
so much.
I think the time has come for another one. Uh,
Uh,
which takes into account some of what you've been telling me. Uh,
Now that you mentioned the book, I think if anybody wants to understand, because much of what has happened in Kashmir is not reported, and the book gives you a sense of what happened after 2019.
yeah, exactly. So, as I said, that was Anuradha Bhasin, who was my guest today, who has given a very, very astute 360 view of what's happened after Pahalgam. But what are the under subterranean things that were going on in Kashmiri society among Kashmiris before this attack happened and after 370 was read down or done away with. Thank you, Anuradha, for this uh, discussion with us. And
Thank
I'll
you
be back.
for having me, and a pleasure talking.
And I'll be back next week once again with another guest on the Wire Talks. Till then, from me, Sidharth Bhatia, and the rest of the team, goodbye.